Another animation composable from Jetpack Compose system is animated content, and in this video we will be talking about that. Note that animated content is an experimental animation API and it is subject to change or removal in future. However, because it is an important API and it is somehow straightforward to use, we will be discussing it and I will show you how to use it. First, let's see when we will use animated content. When you have content that will be swapped with another content, or you will change it with another content, it's a good scenario for using animated content. For example, here I have a box containing a text that will be changed when the user clicks the right button or the left button. This acts like a counter that increments or decrements this digit. Currently, this doesn't have an animation, it just changes the numbers in a crisp way. For example, it changes 0 to 1, 1 to 2, 2 to 3, and so on. And also we have some content here that is text, and this will be swapped with some longer text when the user clicks the checkbox here, the expand checkbox. Currently this doesn't have an animation, but since here we have some content that will be swapped with another content, it's a good use case for animated content. And another API that we will be talking about in this video is Crossfade. Note that the Crossfade and animated content are somehow similar. I mean, you use animated content and Crossfade when you have some content that will be swapped or changed with another content. However, Crossfade is a little bit more limited when compared to animated content. Usually you will use Crossfade when you simply want to fade through two contents. I mean, you want to fade out an initial view, for example, an image that you have here, you want to fade it out, and then you want to fade in another image. This is called crossfade, and it's a good use case for using the crossfade animation. So currently we have three parts that have places for swapping content with another content. However, they don't have an animation. First, let's run the application and see how it works without the animation, and then after that we will add the animations step by step. We wait for the application to be built and installed on the emulator. I'm using the built-in emulator, and there we go, it's running. So first, the sample 1 section, animated content, it doesn't have an animation yet, but it will work by counting and by incrementing the digits. So the right button, you can see that the numbers are incrementing and decrementing when I press the left button, but it doesn't have an animation. The changes are just sharp and crisp. And the second part, animated content sample 2, when I press or check the expand checkbox, this content, the show text, I mean the short text, is supposed to be swapped with another longer text. Let's see. You can see that the two text sections are swapped, but they don't have an animation. And finally, the third part, the crossfade animation sample, when I click one of the images, the image that is currently shown, I'm supposed to see another image from that collection. I have a collection defined as an enum class that is supposed to contain different images or pictures of a family. So I press the man picture and it crossfades. Actually, it doesn't crossfade, just switches to the next image, and all the members of the family. They don't have an animation though. And now let's start working on the animation and implementing animated content and crossfade for our composables. First, the counter section. You can see after I minimize or hide the emulator, I'm supposed to work on this part, the digit. The digit works here. This box contains the digit, the text, the digit text. So I select the whole box, and then as you can see, I have also added a comment that you can see in the code that I upload for the course, and this will tell you where to add animated content. Once I select this area, the box, I press Alt and Enter, and then surround with widget, surround with container, and the container that I'm supposed to use is animated content. I press Enter, and animated content works by receiving a state. Here, our state is actually the count that specifies the digit currently displayed here. So, as you can see in the list of parameters for animated content, we have target state as one mandatory parameter for this composable. So for that, I pass in count, and you can see that count is a state variable that I have defined above. If you see the source code, I have defined count as a delegate, using delegate as a state variable that contains the digit currently displayed here, and it starts from 0. I also have other state variables defined for specifying the expand section, the short text and line text section, and also the crossfade section, as you can see. Okay, back to our animated content. So my animated content receives a target state, and for its value I pass in count, and for its content you can see that I have used the box that contains our digit. That's it for animated content. Animated content will have some default animation that now it is ready to run, and I don't need to do anything else in order to run a default animation. But for now, let's move on to the next one, the animated content sample 2 section. And here I select the short text part, and once I select it from the preview pane, it will show the corresponding text on the left part. Alright, this is the box that contains it. So I select the whole box, the box ends here, and I press Alt and Enter, surround with widget, and surround with container, and the container that I will use is animated content. Alright, since it requires an initial state, a target state, I pass in the expand variable for it, which is a Boolean variable, a Boolean state. So I pass in expand. I showed you earlier it is state variable that I have defined above. And that's it for animated content part 2, and it will have some default animation. I don't need to do anything else. If you look up the documentation for animated content, you can see that animated content has some default animations. By default, the initial content fades out and then the target content fades in. This behavior is called fade through. So by default, when I run the application and when I change the content with the new content, for example here, when I change 0 to 1 by incrementing the count state variable, 0 fades out and 1 fades in. Alright, and the final part, crossfade. Crossfade is also easy to use, and all I have to do is select this part, the box that contains the section, text, as you can see, and also the picture that will be displayed. I select the whole part. Let's see if we select it correctly. Here's the box scope. So I select the whole box. Then surround with widget, surround with container, and the container will be crossfade this time. Let's see what parameters crossfade requires. So for crossfade, we have target state, similar to animated content, target state, and for target state I'm gonna use pick, which is the state variable that specifies the picture currently shown. And looks like I also need to pass in a picture variable here. Since Compose recommends me to use the parameter passed into the lambda, I'm gonna use it. Actually, I'm gonna use picture here, and then wherever I have used pick, I'm gonna replace it with picture. Picture. Actually, pick here because I cannot reassign picture, and target state. Okay, here's the tricky part. When the user clicks this picture, I'm gonna get the whole members of the items. The actually the picture enum class, it has 5 members, and then I compare the current picture with the length of the whole array, or the whole members of the array, and then if I was less than the count, I can increment it. I can move one step forward and I can increment it and select the next picture. If I have reached the end of the array, then I must start from 0, from the first count, and I cannot increment it anymore. All right. objects item. And now we have our crossfade composable. Let's run the application to see if it works and how it works by using its default animations. Okay, our application is running. Let's run the first animated content. There we go. You see that we have some fade out animation here. Although it is simple, it's better than nothing. And now the second part, you can see that it has some animation, fade out and fade in. And the third part, you can see that it is working by fading through different components. But next, I'm going to show you how to customize these animations. For example, what if I want to swap the content that I have for this digit in a direction that I want. For example, when I press this button, I want to slide in 1 from the left and slide out 0 from the right. And when I press the left button, I want to slide out 0. Actually, if this is 10, when I press the left button, I want to slide out 10 from the left and slide in 9 from the right. It is fortunately possible, and it's a little bit noteworthy here. You should be careful how to use it. I select the animated content, and I'm gonna add a parameter called transition spec. This is very important, transition spec. As you can see from the list of parameters, transition spec accepts a lambda. As you can see, it is a lambda and it has to return a content transform. So I create a lambda, and then inside it there's an easy way to create content transform. Of course, you can create content transform this way by using its constructor content transform and then passing it parameters. As you can see, content transform has a constructor that you can pass in transition, enter transition and exit transition to, but I'm gonna show you a better way and an easier way. Instead of creating a content transform object, I'm gonna use these helper functions. Slide in horizontally for the new content that is entering, and at the same time fade in, and then I use the width function. This is an infix function that will return a content transform for me. So on the right of it, I need to use an exit transition. Slide out horizontally, slide out horizontally, plus fade out. And then I can also use the using function, the using infix function, which accepts a size transform on its right. Size transform like this. And the result of all of that will give us a content transform required by our transition spec. As you can see, the using returns a content transform. Okay, note that I told you I want to slide numbers in a specific way. So I want to slide in horizontally. Let's first examine the right part. When I am pressing the right button, I want to slide in horizontally from the left. So slide in horizontally. Here I have initial offset x, which is the full width. So width, I have the full width. I want to start from the left, so I use minus width. Actually, I reverse the offset in order to start from the left. One full width from the left. And then fade in. Fade in, I don't need to pass in something for it. And slide out horizontally. I want to slide out from the right. So this will accept a target offset x, as you can see from the list of parameters. It also receives full width, and then it will go to one full width. Like that. Of course, this is only for the right button, and I will add the logic for the other button as well soon. Size transform. How about the size transform? The size transform deals with the size animation that you want to apply if you optionally want to do so. So because it is also good to know, I'm gonna show you how to do it. Size transform can be created in several ways. I'm gonna use keyframes for it. The keyframes function, if you open it, you can see its list of parameters. Keyframes, it will return a keyframes spec. And in turn, it will give us size transform. So it receives an initial size and target size for the animation. So I say go to int size, change the size of the animation, the size of the container, to initial size dot width divided by 2, and initial size dot, or target size, actually target size. Of course, you can play with these parameters and change their values. You don't have to do exactly what I'm doing here. Target size dot height divided by 2, and actually what I'm doing here is just showcasing how keyframes works for creating a size transform, and it will not do any important animation here because our initial size and target size will be the same. And now we have our animation. This is only for the right button. How about the left button? So I add an if statement to distinguish them. I say if target state is bigger than the initial state. This is important because we can decide which animation to run. This means that when we want to increment the number, but what if we want to decrement it? then we use the else statement. In that case, I use slide in horizontally again, plus fade in for the new content with slide out horizontally with fade out. What is this 8 that I added here by mistake? And then using size transform this using after fade out and size transform. Let's create size transform and just like we did here, size transform the lambda form of it, and it will give us an initial size. Actually, because I was just going to show you how it worked, how keyframes worked, I'm not going to use size transform here because I have my content transform here anyways. And for sliding horizontally, because I'm pressing the left button here, the slide-in will be from the right. So I will start sliding from the full width to actually the zero width, the zero offset. And for the slide out horizontally, I will slide out from the left. So I will go from the width to minus width because I'm sliding out like that. And now I have a custom animation. And one thing before we say this is complete, actually each of these helper functions like slide in horizontally also has a parameter called animation spec, for which you can specify an animation like a tween animation or a spring animation to give you a custom animation that you want. For example, I can add a spring animation here, but for brevity I'm just going to skip it for now. Let's run the application to see what we have for the custom animation of part 1. Okay, let's test our animation. There we go. You can see that our numbers are sliding from the left to the right, and now from the right to the left. Yes, not bad, better than before. Now at least we have an animation, a sliding animation that moves in a way that we want it. As I said, you can also add some animation spec like a tween animation or a spring animation to give it a more custom look. Now let's move on to the next part, the animated content sample 2, and here I'm going to add some animation spec, some transition spec. After target state, transition spec, again a lambda, it has a lambda, and note that I can use slide in horizontally or slide in vertically, but there's also another helper function that is better suited here in my opinion, and it is called slide into container, and I'm gonna use that, slide into container. I'm gonna slide the new content into the container and at the same time fade it in, along with some exit animation. Slide out of container for the content that is driven out of the container, plus fade out. The content is at the same time fading out the old text, and this will give me a content transform. Slide in container has some required parameters. As you can see, slide into container has towards parameter because I want to slide in, let's see, I want to slide in the new text from the bottom. Yes, because I want to slide in from the bottom, I say slide direction dot up. The direction is up, and the old text, the short text, is supposed to slide out of the container in the up direction. So again, slide direction dot up, and of course slide direction itself is part of animated content scope. And fade out. Note that you can still use using here to add a content, to add a size transform, as I showed you earlier. Size transform like this, and this actually use that size transform keyframes. I use the keyframes function, and I use initial size and then target size here. Int size initial size dot width and target size dot height at 150 at this time of the animation. And we also need to specify the we need to also specify the animation duration. So duration millis, I use 300 for it, 300 milliseconds. And let's also use this format of int size for the previous one. Here I didn't specify the time, int size at 150. Also specify the duration millis. You can pass in any parameter, any value for your duration, any duration that you want. However, I used 300 milliseconds like this. Back to this part, animated content sample 2. So we have a simple slide in container and a slide out of container, along with fade in and fade out using size transform. This will give us a complete chain of animations to customize the swap animation behavior. Let's run the application to see the result. Alright, expand, shrink, expand, shrink. There we go. Now we have a better animation, as you can see. The like text, the short text slides out of the container from the top, and the new text slides in from the bottom. Similar to the previous sample that we had, and then I told you that we can have custom animation spec for our animation behavior. Here we can also have that as well. For slide into container, we can have our animation spec similar to slide in horizontally and slide in vertically. I can add a parameter here. Let's minimize the emulator, and animation spec, I'm gonna use a spring animation here, spring, because the text is being swapped with another text. Animation will be looking good and better with a spring animation. So spring, and I give it a good bounce, somehow exaggerating bouncing behavior. Damping ratio, for damping ratio I use spring dot damping ratio high bouncy to show you how this animation can be customized. I also use the custom animation spec. Let's import spring. If you click spring with control and click, you can see its definition. It's a singleton, and it actually implements the dynamic animation, the physics-based animation in Jetpack Compose. Okay, we imported spring, and now if we run it, we will see the effect of using the spring animation on our text. Okay, expand. There we go. You can see the effect of the spring animation. That's nice. Wow. Okay. Next, and as the final part, I'm gonna customize my crossfade animation to see what customization options I have for my crossfade animation. Here, after minimizing the emulator, of course, I can see that I have crossfade and what parameters for it. I have animation spec, and the default animation spec, as you can see, is tween, and I can customize it. I can add a custom tween animation, for example, with a custom duration different from the duration of the default tween animation. Let's import tween as well from the core animation package. Duration millis. I'm gonna use, for example, 1000 for 1 second, so that you can see how it fades through the different pictures, like a slideshow, but not exactly like that. And also we can have delay millis to delay before running the tween animation each time that we slide from one picture to another. And we also have easing to add an interpolation for how we change the animations and how we switch from one scene to another. And the default one is fast out, slow in, but I'm using linear easing here. linear easing, because I just want a linear and smooth a transition from one picture to another. Okay, looks like we are good to go. Let's run the application to see the result. We wait for the emulator to launch. Actually, the emulator is already running. We know that it's here. Come on. Yes, it is running. We just wait for the application to be built and installed on the emulator so that we can see it. Okay, let's test our animation, the crossfade animation, by clicking one of our pictures, the picture that we have by default. There we go. Fade through, pick different pictures from sun to all. You can see that each picture that we click is faded out and the new picture comes in. Okay, so that's it for the crossfade animation, and you can see that it is simpler to work and implement than the animated content transition and the animated content composable for creating animations. So in this video you saw that we already had some content that was working. We had composables that did their job. We had a counter that was working. We had a checkbox that affected our content that was supposed to be displayed. When we clicked the checkbox, when we selected it, the content changed to another content, and it worked without the animation. And we also had something like the slideshow that changed to different pictures in a collection when we clicked the default picture and each picture. But you can see that by adding the animation, we added some meaning and we added some expected behavior for the user, so that user can see some default, can see some natural behavior in how the content transitions on the screen and how the content behaves similar to real world. For example, by clicking the right button, the user can see some behavior similar to natural phenomenon of moving stuff from the left to the right or from the right to the left. And this is the meaning of meaningful motion. That is the recommended way of using animation in Android applications. You should never exaggerate animations in your applications. Just use animations when you add some meaning and you add some useful notice and hint and help for the user, and you make the application easier to use with the animation. And for in terms of the second part, we also added some default, we added some expected behavior that added some meaning for how the content transitioned between different states of the UI. The old content slided out and the new content slided in. And for the second part, for the third part and the final part, that was crossfade, we also added some expected behavior that made the application easier to use and probably our Android application user happier when they are using our application. So that's it for animated content. I hope that you liked this lecture, and I see you in the next video.